Global Media Day. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. We know some of you have traveled very far, some of you have traveled a little bit. Irrespective, we really appreciate you making the time to spend the day with us and to go over some of the issues that IATA has been involved in, and also to review what the outlook for the industry is in 2024. Before we get started, perhaps what we should do is, given that we're in the airline industry, start with the safety announcement. So perhaps we could play the video of the safety features of this building.
Outlines what you should do in the event of an emergency. You'll hear an alarm if there's a fire or another reason to evacuate the building. An announcement will give you instructions on what to do next. Don't panic. You should leave the building immediately, but you'll find help on hand to guide you. There will be members of IATA Emergency Response Team available to help. You'll recognize them by their green armbands. Make your way quickly but safely to the nearest emergency exit. There are 2 on each floor, one facing the airport and another next to the elevators. If you have any form of disability or think that you'll find evacuation difficult, please wait in the elevator hall for the fire service to help you. You must not use the elevators in the event of an emergency. Exit the building and make your way to the designated assembly points. These are clearly marked, one next to the arena and another on the airport side. Please wait here for further instructions. First aid kits are available in the reception areas as well as in the infirmary on the first floor. If you or someone you're with feels unwell or has an accident, simply dial 111 to contact the on-site security team. Thank you for your time and attention. Safety and security is everyone's responsibility.
Great, thank you for that. Now, just before we get started, a few other pieces of information. For those who need the Wi-Fi information is on the screen. When it disappears from the screen, it's on the back of your identification badge, so it's always with you, along with the instructions for accessing the media kit, the hashtag for the event, which is hashtag IATA GMD, as well as instructions for some of our social media channels. Having said that, the other announcement I need to make is about embargo. So in order to have this first session between 8:45 and 10:45 as free from distraction as possible, what we'd like to do is to embargo this room for those 2 hours. So no tweets, no social media posts, just if we could all concentrate, listen, take notes, etc. At 10:45, we'll be through all the material, you'll have a press release, and from that point on, everything is reportable as and when it happens. But if we could all just respect that until 10:45, we kind of live in a small bubble here and focus our attention on being here rather than trying to broadcast things to the outside world. Agreeable to everyone? Great, thank you. Then another very important announcement, the washrooms, if you need them, are not on this floor, but they're 1 floor below. If you have any trouble, you need an adapter, you can't find the washrooms, you need something else, I have a fantastic team. Most of them are at the back of the room there. Don't hesitate to ask us if there's something we can do to make your stay here with us more efficient, more effective, and more enjoyable. In the meantime, I'm joined here by an excellent panel of some of our top people at IATA. So we have our Director General, Willie Walsh. We have our Senior Vice President for Sustainability and Chief Economist, Owens Thomsen. And we have Andrew Matters, Director of Policy Standards in the Sustainability and Sustainability and Economics Division. So between us, we'll take you through the first couple of hours of today. And in terms of starting that, I'll ask a few questions of the panel just to gather some, I guess, feeling for the main issues that we've been looking at over the past year and to get some reflections on that. So with that in mind, perhaps, Willie, the first question is to you. And looking at 2023, how would you characterize the year, given that we're in December now, so most of it's behind us?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Geneva. Thank you for joining us today. I think 2023 has been a good year for the industry. Certainly, the recovery gained significant momentum as we went through the year. We were surprised by the early opening of China, which came as a very pleasant surprise, and we've seen traffic significantly increase in that region, which is certainly a positive. So it won't surprise you that when Barry gives her presentation, we will be looking at upgrading the profitability forecast for 2023. Now, we've always got to put profitability in the airline industry into context, because although it sounds like a big figure when you look at it on an aggregate basis across the industry, in margin terms, we're still significantly below where we need to be and significantly below where we were prior to the pandemic. But in the main, I would say that a good year, frustrating for many airlines because of issues outside of their control. So we continue to see a lot of air traffic control disruption, principally in the US and to a lesser degree in Europe. We had a lot of supply chain issues, which has significantly impacted the capacity that airlines would have wanted to have put into the market. So the traffic growth during the year saw demand slightly outstripping the capacity. It was broadly flat, but I think we would have seen more capacity coming into the market had these supply chain issues not impacted. Very disappointing to see the latest problem with the GTF, which will impact on airline capacity in 2024 and probably in 2025 based on the latest assessment that we have. So OEMs continue to disappoint with delays in the delivery of new aircraft, but also getting access to spare parts for aircraft in service and getting aircraft that are going through maintenance back into service as quickly as possible. So, frustrating to see these issues. But in the main, I think most of the industry is cautiously optimistic as we come towards the end of 2023 and look forward to 2024.
Okay, thanks, Willie. Maybe a question more focused on IATA, but our membership numbers have increased significantly recently. They're up to 321, I think, the last I saw. Is there anything behind that, or any strategy behind that, Willie?
Yeah, I'm really pleased that we've seen a significant increase in member airlines, which is always a positive, and a good mix of business models joining the association as well. I think many people have traditionally looked at us as the representative body for the traditional flag carriers and network carriers. We have now a significant number of low-cost airlines who are members, and indeed many others are in discussions with us to better understand what it is IATA can do for them. So I'm pleased that we're seen as an organisation that's there to serve our members and to represent our members, and strong membership growth during the year. So I think the industry recognises the challenges that we're facing going forward, particularly in the area of sustainability, and that's an area where IATA can contribute to members' learnings in relation to the issues and provide support and data to assist them in their journey to net zero in 2050. So a good year for us internally for IATA, and again looking at the pipeline of potential new members going into 2024, that's very encouraging as well.
Okay, thank you. Also, I'm conscious that as we're ending 23, we've got 2024 and getting very close to 2025, which is when a lot of you will have heard of our 25 by 2025 initiative on gender diversity. We welcomed our first female chair of the Board of Governors this year. We see increasing female participation in senior ranks in the industry. For those who were at the AGM, you would have noticed a very gender-balanced presentation of the panels. But Willie, do you think we're moving fast enough and getting close enough to the targets we've set ourselves?
I think we're moving in the right direction, and it is important to hit that target in 2025, and I've no doubt that we will hit it. It would be great to see us moving a lot faster, because I think this battle for talent as we go forward is going to be one of the issues that challenge the industry in the near to medium term. We've seen a lot of talent leave the industry through the period of the pandemic, and we're hearing, increasing concerns about access to talent in areas like mechanics, engineers. Less so with pilots. I think the pilot issue is pretty much a US specific issue. We don't see the same concerns being expressed in other parts of the world. But I think where we lost talent on the technical side, where people have options to go to other industries, we've struggled to regain or recover some of those people into the industry. And given that it's an area, the technical side of the business tends to be dominated by men, where clearly we have to do a better job there. We have to be seen as an industry that is attractive to men and women, boys and girls, to ensure that we have a steady pipeline of talent coming through in the technical areas. And I think that's the area where we will need to focus a lot of our attention in the next few years. So we're making good progress in senior positions within the industry. We will, I've no doubt, hit the target of 25 by 2025. We're on target within IATA to achieve our internal target, which is the same. So it's not just about looking to our member airlines to deliver on the commitment. But the one area where I think we do have to do a much better job is in attracting more female talent into the technical side of the business. And that's an area where I think we will be focused. Just trying to understand, is there something that we can collectively do as an industry to get the message out there that this is an exciting industry and attract more female talent into that particular field. So that's one area of concern that I think people are expressing to me in relation to the gender balance issue and ensuring that we have a steady pipeline of talent coming into the industry.
Great, thank you. Another issue that IATA has been very active on is accessibility of air transport. Just as a reminder, we've got a very short video. Maybe Jordan, I could ask you to play the video just to bring us all up to speed with the latest on accessibility, and then Willie will ask you a question about that.
15% of the world's population, approximately 1 billion people, live with some form of disability, including so-called invisible disabilities such as deafness or autism. As populations age, this important customer group will grow. Already some airports report increases in assistance requests of 30%. In the light of this, reducing confusion with globally harmonised regulations will help both travellers and airlines. Work with disability organisations resulted in an IATA resolution on passengers with disabilities in 2019 that achieved 3 important outcomes. Firstly, it set principles through which airlines recommitted to provide safe, reliable and dignified travel for people with disabilities. Secondly, it asked governments to use the principles when making legislation. And thirdly, it requested ICAO use these principles as the basis for multilateral initiatives. Challenges include providing for the different types of assistance needed and safely loading mobility aids onto aircraft. IATA has worked with airlines, mobility aid manufacturers, ground service providers, airports and accessibility organisations to produce guidelines for handling wheelchairs. Our goal is to make air travel more accessible with practical measures. The more governments that align their regulations with the IATA principles, the more people with disabilities will have the confidence to travel.
Great. So, Willie, one question that comes to my mind is this we saw the numbers of people with disabilities there. 15 billion, I think it said. Is this a business opportunity for the airlines? Is it a regulatory challenge for the airlines? How would you characterize it?
It's both. It clearly is a business opportunity with what we all expect to see in years ahead with increasing numbers of disability issues being faced by people and a clear desire on their part to travel. So I think the industry, we do a reasonable job. We've clearly had some high-profile failures which tend to attract a lot of attention, and that has triggered us into action. The 2019 commitment that the industry made, we debated this at our recent Board of Governors here in Geneva last Friday, and the board recommitted to the principles that we'd agreed in 2019 and debated whether there's more that we can do as an industry. Because it's clear that there are opportunities to improve our performance as an industry, and there is a business opportunity in attracting more people to fly with us. I think there is some frustration at the lack of harmonization globally, and that's both on the part of airlines, but also on the part of our customers. They're unclear as to what to expect. So there is more work that we need to do, and I think this is an area where the industry, working with regulators, working with governments, working with ICAO, to agree on global standards, global regulations, so as to remove any confusion, would be a very positive step forward. So we're looking at bringing a resolution to our AGM in Dubai next year to reaffirm the commitment on the part of the industry. Because as we said in that video, we want to be able to offer people the ability to travel in a safe, efficient and dignified manner. And as I said, I think some of the high-profile failures that we've seen in the industry do bring into question the dignified manner in which people with disabilities have been handled. The industry, I think, does in the main a good job, but clearly we believe there's more that we can do, and we should always be striving to do better, recognizing that this is both a responsibility that we have, but also an opportunity that the industry has in making ourselves more attractive to people with disabilities, to give them, as I said in the video, the confidence to fly in the future. So you should expect us to continue to focus on this issue, and we will be debating the subject at our AGM in Dubai.
Okay, great. We'll change tracks a little bit. This past, I suppose, 2023 operationally, with a few exceptions, seemed better than 2022. But in my mind, I also have the UK NATS failure at the end of the summer period as kind of a glowing example of maybe where the industry didn't, or parts of the industry didn't step up. Maybe just to remind us of that, we have a short video and then we'll get some comments on that.
Last summer, airlines were forced to cancel over 1,500 flights because of a failure at the UK's air navigation services provider. Thousands of passengers had their travel plans thrown into chaos, with many left stranded. It was nearly a week before schedules returned to normal. Despite the problem being caused by the air traffic control failure, under the current passenger rights regime in Europe, only airlines were held financially responsible to air travellers for care and assistance. Nor were airlines compensated for costs of crews out of position or extra flights laid on. The only cost to UK NATS for its blunder was an apology, which gives little incentive to make improvements. Airlines are arguing for a reset. The current system isn't fair and doesn't lead to better overall performance, which is what passengers and airlines want. One element of the solution is shared accountability. Every player of the aviation system should take its share of responsibility when things go wrong. This will provide a fairer and more transparent structure for both passengers and the airline sector. In an independent study commissioned by IATA, 91% of travellers agreed with the statement, all parties involved in the delay or cancellation should play a role in helping the affected passengers. Things do and can go wrong, and when they do, a fit-for-purpose consumer rights regime would incentivise better performance for all participants in the air travel chain, not just airlines.
So, Willie, I guess the first thing is, did we do better in 23 than we did in 22? And the second is, what are your thoughts on that idea of shared accountability?
Yeah, certainly the performance of the industry was better. The issues we faced in 2022 where there was clear evidence of manpower shortages, resource shortages, principally at airports, but also at some airlines, was largely addressed. And I think we do need to recognise that most airports functioned a lot better in 2023 than they did in 2022. It is still incredibly frustrating that we face incompetence on the part of some providers like NATS, who quite honestly, their performance this year has been appalling. Not just the failure that we witnessed there, the investigation that they did into that failure, the weak response from NATS in terms of what they did, what they got wrong, how they recovered. Very disappointing to see. That event cost the industry hundreds of millions of pounds. And as I said previously, not a single penny of that was borne by NATS. All of the cost of delays, compensation to passengers, which went on for some considerable time, was borne by the industry. Now we have to be careful in relation to this, because this idea of shared responsibility is very important. But what we need, though, is also a review of the regulatory model, because what's likely to happen if we don't see the regulatory model reviewed is if we can succeed in getting service providers like NATS or indeed some airports to bear the cost of their mistakes, it must not be then the case that they can recover that cost through increased air traffic charges or airport charges, which in effect is what the regulatory model would allow them to do. What we have to do is look to see these service providers who have disappointed us significantly in 22 and 23 to be forced to bear the cost, but for that cost to be ring-fenced so that they can't then go and try and recover that from the airlines who suffered all the damage. And we debated this with the Board of Governors again last Friday. Our board members are keen for us to pursue this, but are cautious about the need to ensure that particularly in the case of air navigation service providers, that they don't then have the option of just paying the bill for their cock-up, but recovering the cost of that through increased charges, which is typically the way they operate. So this is an area that must be addressed. I think the regulations that were introduced back in 2004, the 261, these were well-intentioned. I think the regulation has been interpreted by courts because of the poor language that was used in that regulation. I think what we have today bears little resemblance to what was intended when the regulation was first introduced. But it is very frustrating that we see airlines being forced to pick up the bill for failures, weak performance, incompetent management when it comes to some of these airports and ANSPs. But that is particularly the case with NATS. A very, very poor performance by NATS in 2023. We demand a better performance from them in 2024. But I'm not seeing any evidence of a clear understanding on their part of the need to address the issues that led to the failures that we witnessed in 2023.
Okay. While we're on the topic of charges, you've been in the past very vocal on airports and the way that they charge airlines for their services. Do you sense any progress in 2023 in airports' understanding with the airlines?
No. I think airports still struggle to appreciate the need to act in a commercial fashion. They are, in most cases, regulated monopolies or quasi-monopolies who have little incentive to perform in an efficient manner. And we'll have to continue as an industry to focus on this. We've seen many airports around the world look to significantly increase their charges in 2023 and in 2024, way beyond what can be justified by the inflationary issues that we've all faced during 2023. And I know Murray will talk to some degree about this as well. It is important for us to have a fair system. We continue to call on the EU to look at the Airport Charges Directive, to give that some teeth, to enable the EU to require airports to act in a more efficient manner. And where competition doesn't address the charges, and that's certainly the case with air navigation service providers and most airports, then you have to have strong regulation to replicate a competitive landscape in the same way as airlines face intense competition pretty much everywhere they operate. So there's still a big gap between what we as airlines have to do and what we see airports doing when it comes to charges, efficiency, and looking to ensure that everyone is acting in a commercial manner in the interests of our customers. Airports are too quick to dismiss the impact of their charges on ticket prices, and as you'll see in the presentation that Murray will give, the margins for the airline industry are wafer thin. So anything that increases the cost base for airlines will automatically have to be passed through to consumers through charges, and that's something that airports just don't understand. So it is disappointing. We're fighting hard on this. We are seeing some positives from regulators, and we've succeeded in some of the legal cases that we've taken, but many of these are ongoing. But we will continue to act in the interests of airlines and consumers to ensure that airport charges are minimised and that the regulatory environment tries to replicate a competitive landscape to force them to act in a more commercial manner.
Okay, great. Sticking with the topic of airports, this year Amsterdam was very much in the headlines for reasons other than charges, but the slot issue and the noise issue. I'm sure people have followed it, but maybe just to refresh our memory, we can play a short video and then we'll get some comments.
The aviation community was stunned in 2022 when the Dutch government decided to cut annual flights at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport by 12%. It wanted to reduce noise impact on the local community, but in doing so, it ignored the globally agreed balanced approach which manages aircraft noise issues. Fortunately, the government backed down, at least temporarily, in the face of strong opposition from key trading partners, including the United States as well as the European Commission. The incident has, however, re-emphasised the importance of the balanced approach. This process is enshrined in many legal frameworks, including the Chicago Convention, European law, and the historic US-EU Open Skies Agreement. Its aim is to manage aircraft noise while protecting the benefits of aviation and consists of 4 steps. Firstly, noise should be managed at source, which means developing and deploying quieter engines and airframes. And in fact, aircraft have become 75% quieter over the last 60 years. Secondly, land use planning should limit the growth of populations affected by noise. Noise-proofing residences could also be an option. Next, operational measures should be explored, such as continuous descent approaches which reduce noise, and only if these steps fail to achieve the noise reduction target can operational restrictions, such as limiting the number of flights, be used. With the balanced approach, the industry's track record on noise is solid. Importantly, this demonstrates that improvements in noise can be achieved without sacrificing the jobs and economic activity that aviation generates and on which local communities rely.
Great. So I guess 2 questions come to mind for that. One is, are you satisfied with the resolution that we've achieved in Amsterdam? And are you concerned that it's kind of setting the scene for other airports or other governments to take similar measures?
I have to be honest, I was very surprised when the government in the Netherlands did what they did. Given the importance of Schiphol to the economy of that country and the value that the hub brings to local business. We've often talked about the value of hub airports and the importance of providing direct connectivity for business investment. Schiphol punches way above its weight given the local origin and destination market that exists there. It's a fantastic hub airport. Yes, it had challenges in 2022, but I think the impact that it would have had the government not backed down would have been really significant. I think it would have undermined the whole integrity of the hub operation there. It really would have had a bigger impact on KLM than most other airlines, although it would have impacted on all airlines operating there. I think what was encouraging from an industry point of view is that everybody in the industry opposed what was happening. So, you might have expected some people to see this as a competitive opportunity. The dismantling of the Amsterdam hub would have benefited some of the other hubs in Europe, but nobody took that view. They all took the view that this was wrong and that the industry had to stand together. So I was very pleased that happened. Now, we have to recognize, noise is an issue. And we all know that this is an issue that airlines and airports have been dealing with for many years. What is very frustrating, though, is when you look at the number of people impacted by noise from other forms of transport, it way exceeds the number of people impacted by noise from air. So, the European Environment Agency produces a report, and the last data is 2017. I think it's due to be updated for 2022. But there are more people, 4 times the number of people impacted by noise from rail than noise from air, and about 30 times the number of people impacted by noise from roads than noise from air. And yet, air travel is the one that seems to get all of the attention. So, when we're looking at environmental issues, it's important that we consider all aspects of the environment. But if the government was serious that this was about noise, there were a lot of things they could have done before taking the extreme measure of reducing the slots. And I think it was on that basis that we succeeded in demonstrating that they hadn't fulfilled their legal obligations to follow the process of the balanced approach process that we've outlined there. And I think it was highly embarrassing for the government to be forced to back down in the face of criticism from the US Department of Transportation and indeed and the European Commission as well, who wrote what I think was a very strong worded letter of criticism of what was happening in Amsterdam. So some progress being made. We're not seeing a similar approach being adopted in other major European airports. I think there are some airports struggling with some issues. Dublin Airport has a challenge, but their challenge is a passenger cap, which is down to Surface Act Road access to the airport. It's not a noise issue. It's interpreted by some as being noise. It's not. The restriction is on surface access to the airport, and that's why there was a planning cap on the number of passengers at Dublin Airport, which the airport authority is addressing at the moment. So disappointing to see what happened. I'm pleased that the government has backed down. I'm hopeful that there will be a better understanding of the process that needs to be followed, and that we won't see other governments embarrassing themselves by reaching for solutions that they think will be popular, but fail to fulfill the obligations, the legal obligations that they have.
The whole issue also brought some, I guess, attention to slots and the importance of the slot allocation system. I guess 2 questions from that. One is, do you think that governments understand the value of the slot system, what it brings, and what it brings both to airlines and to local economies and consumers? And are you concerned that governments like the UK, for example, are starting to look at the slot rules that they have?
Yeah, I think slot allocation is a very complex issue that isn't fully understood by a lot of people. It really is a very fine, integrated system that needs to be carefully addressed, because one airport undoing the slot allocation rule can have a global impact. Heathrow would have a global impact, and without question, governments need to be very sensitive in how they address these issues. I don't think there's a full appreciation for how effective the slot rules are. And if you recall, slot rules are a system that's independently regulated. We have slot regulators at most of the slot-constrained airports. The World Airline Slot Guidelines are guidelines that have been drawn up by airports and airlines working together. So it's not an airline issue. Sometimes it's interpreted as this is a system developed by airlines for the benefit of airlines. It's not. It's a system developed jointly by everybody involved to ensure that the allocation of scarce resources can be done in the most efficient way possible. And unwinding the rules that have been in place successfully for many years, I think, is something that I would highly discourage. That's not to say we can't improve things. We've seen various minor amendments to the rules over the years, so there's always scope to look at better ways of doing it. But to fundamentally dismantle a system that has been very effective, I think is something that governments should be very cautious and wary of. So I pay less attention to what the UK government does today than I used to, and that's probably the case with just about everybody in the world, given the state of politics in the Conservative Party at the moment. So we'll wait and see what happens.
Okay, great. I think that brings us to, I suppose, the big issue for the airlines, which is sustainability. And Marie, I know you're just back from the CAP 3 meeting, and that's kind of the secret code, but maybe you can help us crack that in a short presentation as to where the industry is at on its sustainability efforts.
Obviously, with great pleasure. I'll go and stand over here. So I would want to start with a very short quote from the group Talking Heads. Seems appropriate on a day like this. No disrespect to anybody. And Talking Heads said in their song Once in a Lifetime, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And I think that's really the key question that we all face today. And if we then look at the 20th century, it was an amazing century where, economic development was unparalleled, not only once in a lifetime, but, once in human history have we had such an excellent century as the 20th century. So how did we manage to do that? How did we get there? I would say two salient features of that century. And of course, the order is slightly subjective. First of all, transportation. Yeah, huge advances in transportation and huge reductions in transportation costs meant that the world got connected cheaply, and ideas and people and goods and everything could flow freely in the global economy and contribute to this stellar performance of the 20th century. And the other salient feature of the 20th century is obviously fossil fuels. Yeah. The wealth in the 20th century was built on the expansion of the use of fossil fuels that penetrated absolutely every corner of this global economy, and this is still the case today. So what do we do now then? Well, there are solutions for replacing fossil fuels. There are no solutions available currently for replacing aviation. So as an industry, we have obviously understood that what we must do is to figure out how we can fly not using so much fossil fuels. And that is indeed the task that we have all set ourselves. We adopted the goal of net zero in 2021, a year ahead of ICAO, not bragging, but just saying. So they followed suit in 2022, and the industry is therefore uniquely united in this mission to reach net zero in 2050. And I'll stop bragging and turn to the topic. So indeed, I just came back from this ICAO conference called CAF3. That stands for Conference on Aviation and Alternative Fuels. And the 3 is because it was the third such conference under ICAO's auspices. And the goal that ICAO had set for their conference was to see if the member states could perhaps come up with some kind of quantified vision for how we could all promote more SAF production and of course contribute in a significant way to aviation's transition to net zero. And indeed the result was that the member states adopted a global vision of a 5% emissions reductions target for international aviation by 2030. And the declaration that was the product of this conference, you can find it on ICAO's website, and it has all kinds of other positive things said in it. The two most positive things, I think, out of the declaration is that it recognizes that we all need to strive for installing SAF production absolutely everywhere. We know that the production sites of Europe and the US will be insufficient to produce all the SAF that we need by 2050. So our industry really needs SAF production to be on every continent and in as many countries as possible. And the other thing that we really need is a system that allows all airlines to use their SAF purchases for claims against their decarbonization obligations. So today there are decarbonization obligations under ICAO's CORSIA system, and there are obligations also under the EU, and we can perhaps anticipate that there will be more such obligations in the future. And of course, all airlines need to be able to use their SAF purchases against these obligations, not only the airlines that are lucky enough to be located in a country or on a continent that actually produces the physical SAF. So a key piece of market infrastructure that is recognized in the declaration as a potential solution for these problems is what we can call a SAF registry and accounting system. And the diagram sort of illustrates what that can do for us. And what it can do for us is that it can separate the production and physical delivery of the fuel from the environmental attributes of that fuel. So you could be an airline in Africa, you could buy SAF from a SAF producer in Singapore, and then you get a certificate with the environmental attributes of the purchase that you've made, but the SAF is produced in Singapore and is maybe used by a Singaporean airline in Singapore. So the atmosphere obviously doesn't care, where we use the SAF. It's beneficial to everybody if we can do this kind of, find this kind of solution to this problem of letting even airlines that don't have local SAF production participate in the global SAF market. And of course, let anybody who doesn't benefit from a large aviation market also potentially participate in the production of SAF. There will be more on these things in the afternoon from other members of our division, so forgive me if I'm a little bit hasty on some of these things. So when we say that we have to have this piece of critical market infrastructure, the registry and accounting system, we have to understand how inexistent this market is. There's no market infrastructure. We don't know the price of SAF. Nobody knows the price of SAF. It's not like you can find it on your Bloomberg screen. So all of this has to be produced somehow and created. And when we say that in 2023, only 500,000 tons of SAF fuel has been produced, I hope you understand what kind of tiny, tiny little number that is. And it only represents 0.2% of aviation's total fuel consumption in 2023. And look, in 2050, we are going to need 500 million tons. We're going to need 1,000 more times 2023 output. So that is the phenomenal challenge that we all face. And many, of course, think that this is absolutely not possible. Certainly those who think that we will only rely on the current production process. The current production process, or pathway if you wish, is called PEFA. And it uses mainly fatty, fuels, used cooking oil and so on the top image here. And of course, there will not be enough of those feedstocks, of those inputs into this particular production process to produce 500 million tons. That's absolutely clear. So what needs to happen is that we need to multiply these production processes and develop new ones. And these other ones that I mentioned here are alcohol to jet, fish at trout, power to liquid, are not commercially viable today, but we have absolute confidence that they will be in the future. And here's an illustration of the different. I'm not a chemist, but we have chemists in the team. If anybody wants to understand how this works, we'll hook you up with them. So into all of these different pathways and production processes, we can use a number of feedstocks, and that sort of kills the conversation that there's not going to be enough feedstocks around for our transition in aviation. So here you see on the right-hand side the various feedstocks that go into these various production processes on the right. And many of the feedstocks can be used for, some of the production process can take many feedstocks, and those are, I guess, arguably the ones that we really want to, promote in the first place. So the good news in all of this is that given the variety of potential feedstocks, there are feedstocks on every continent in the world. So everybody can participate in this process, and this is really what we need. We need, somehow to make it really attractive to invest in the development of these feedstocks and in all of these production processes. So why are people not investing in this, and why is this not happening at the scale yet that we would like to see? Well, let's just ponder a little bit what happens in the oil and gas industry. So, of course, it would be marvelous if we could satisfy our demand for 500 million tons in 2050 by independent new energy producers. That would be amazing. But we have to recognize that there's a lot of work that has been done by the oil and gas industry, that they have lots of good infrastructure that we would like to put into good use for renewable energy distribution. And of course, they have lots of money. So what do they do with their money? Look, this is absolutely amazing. So we've lost the legends. That's obviously my fault. I've asked for forgiveness. But the dark blue part of these bars is the cash that the oil companies have put into their own oil and gas exploration capex. They're investing in their own business as usual and developing oil and gas exploration and production. The medium blue part of this bar is what they have spent on distributing dividends to their shareholders and buying back their own shares. Sorry if the outrage in my voice is tangible. And the light blue little bit up there is their own debt repayments, because of course they are also an investment-heavy industry, and they accumulate debt, and now they can pay some of that back. And that little red bit in there, that you could almost miss if we hadn't colored it in red, is the money that they have allocated to developing new renewable energy technologies. I am flabbergasted. So that little red line represents 1% of total and clean energy investments globally, and only about 3% of their money. So this clearly has to change. And we are on our own not large enough to motivate that change, because aviation represents only about 8% of refining output. So they can totally go ahead and profit maximize without us. If we disappeared from the face of Earth, it would not alter much the profit profile of this industry. So somehow we have to make that change. And here we see how much money totally globally that actually goes into the oil and gas industry. This is the International Energy Agency's number. They say that 800 billion goes into oil and gas investments, and this is 2023 numbers. So our most pessimistic sort of, or most draconian estimate of the annual investment needs that we need in our industry to engineer our energy transition would be 150 billion per year. Yeah. So we need 150 billion per year. They get 800 billion per year. So we only need 1/5 or 19% of the money that goes into oil and gas to succeed in our transition. Nobody's going to tell me that that's not possible. And let's also remind ourselves, thanks to, again, the International Energy Agency, that the 800 billion that currently goes into this industry is twice the estimated necessary investments in this industry from an energy transition perspective. We will need oil in 2050. I'm not saying that we need to, get rid of this industry, far from it. We will need oil, but we do not need oil at this scale. Currently, the oil industry is opening 6% new wells, an increase of 6% in wells in 2023 when GDP is 3%. Yeah, does not make sense. So the investment pace in their industry is twice the necessary amount, and that would amply cover our investment needs, and we could totally get to net zero in 2050. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Marie. Maybe we'll take a few questions on environment before we get to the outlook. So I'll open it up to the room. If people have questions that they want to ask, raise your hand, identify yourself. Happy to take questions. Maybe over here.
Good morning, just one other side. How happy are you with the 5% target? Or is it not that ambitious? Sorry, I was in the wrong position.
Right. So, I think that what's good about this target is that it's a target that's expressed by the member states. Yeah. So they are obviously, from everything that I've shown you, at least, if not wholly, they are definitely majority-wise responsible for making sure that this happens. Sorry for continuing a bit in the same vein, but, how many times have the UN member states promised to stop subsidizing fossil fuel development? I don't know how many times, actually. Maybe the first time was around the Paris Agreement. And every time they get together, they say they're not going to do this again. And every year that goes by, they put more money into subsidizing fossil fuel production. Yeah, I'm not talking about consumption. I'm literally talking about production. So, they're creating an environment for us where our investment needs are sort of struggling against this big uphill. And then, there was a time, if I can put it that way, when there were some kind of efforts trying to pin the responsibility on us. I have heard so many times that airlines have to, de-risk the investments, so that the oil and gas companies are going to invest in renewable investments. That just doesn't make sense. They have, their net profit margins are, somewhere, obviously it depends on which company, yeah, but between 11 and 30% net profit margins in that industry. Ours, is in the low single digits. So how on earth can it be up to the airlines to de-risk these investments? It has to come from the member states. So on that score, I think it's really welcome that the member states have imposed some kind of pressure upon themselves to make this happen. In that sense, we are pleased.
Great, other questions? Tom?
Tom Valentine from Orient Aviation Magazine. You'd be aware that the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines have committed to using a 5% SAF by 2030, which is just 6 years away from now. How challenging do you think that'll be? And what's your feeling about individual airline groups setting their own targets when really the whole industry has got a target anyway?
Yes, I think what I think is really useful with airlines setting their own targets is that when we aggregate all of those targets, we understand with utmost clarity that the demand vastly exceeds the supply today and probably for some time into the future. So that's another thing that I often hear from certain sources, that somehow we are supposed to, in the same de-risking vein, the airlines are supposed to guarantee the market for these companies. Yeah, that's a very strange economic policy. So, but in any case, if anybody thinks that they need a demand signal, it's there. Yeah, with utmost clarity, all of these airlines have committed to this kind of self-use. You top that up, and you understand that there's a vast market out there. So I'd say no further signals are needed from the airline industry to show how serious we are about this. And then, of course, it's after all somewhat problematic, yeah, when you commit to buying a product that doesn't exist. Just saying. So production is really the issue, yeah. So we've satisfied the demand signaling demand, I think, and now what we really need to see is all these other guys to step up and make the production happen, which is an absolutely necessary condition for succeeding with the demand promises. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Maybe here at the front?
Ayşe Kanık from Aviation Turk. I was wondering what is your approach on should governments provide a roadmap for the industry to encourage the more investment to SAF? Are there any studies on that? Because the governments put the regulation and that's it.
Yes, I mean, I think governments should encourage, so which industry? Certainly not necessarily ours, yeah? Governments came together or did this separately and created a whole new energy sector, which is, of course, wind and solar. Too new, arguably, right? We didn't have wind and solar, I don't know exactly how many years ago, but 20 years ago we didn't have wind and solar, right? And now we have wind and solar, and they are the cheapest energies in the universe. Yeah. So obviously we know how to replace fossil fuels. Yeah, we do. And it's more of that we need. And within the more of that, we need our slice, which is about 8% of refining output. So that's what needs to happen. Governments know how to do that. They did that with wind and solar. Why are they refusing to do that when it comes to our industry is beyond my comprehension.
Question over here.
Yeah, Ian Taylor from Travel Weekly in London. Virgin Atlantic operated 100% sustainable fuel flight across the Atlantic last week. The coalition of aviation environmental groups questioned the sustainability of sustainable aviation fuel, pointing out the emissions from the tailpipe are the same. So I wondered how you respond to that argument. And secondly, on power to liquid, which is obviously the most promising alternative fuel, realistically, how far off production at scale are we from power to liquid fuel?
Yeah, so as long as we're using combustion engines, it has to combust, yeah, and there will be emissions. So the only solution to not combusting is to figure out another way of propulsion, and you know, we know the problems with those solutions when it comes to aviation. So for the foreseeable future, into 2050, I dare to report, we will be using combustion engines. And then the only option we have is to make sure, if we can, you know, that these combustion engines can run on fuel that is itself sustainable. So we replace the fossil fuel jet stuff that goes into the planes today with something else that is not of fossil origin. That is the maximum that we can do as long as we use combustion engines. Yeah. And then, you know, how quickly these other solutions for making sustainable aviation fuels are going to become commercial obviously depends on the money that goes in, right? So I think that there's, you know, maybe even an exponential relationship there. Yeah, that we can channel more investments into those areas. I would think that they can become commercially mature much faster. And there's also a misconception, I believe, you know, regarding sustainable aviation fuels, that they will disappear you know? And there I think that there's a confusion about, you know, the share of the total. It's true that now in the early stages, the total contributions to our decarbonization will, you know, the vast majority of those contributions will come from sustainable aviation fuels. And then going into the future, that share will decline, but that doesn't mean that the absolute amount declines. Yeah, so SAF is here to stay, and these other technologies, you know, could actually surprise us on the upside. That is possible, and I think, you know, I take great hope in the experience with wind and solar. The only thing is that it has to happen even faster.
I think the issue with sustainable aviation fuel that's important to recognise is that it has been accepted by governments as a credible pathway for the aviation industry. And the issue here is that we're in effect recycling the CO2, we're recycling the carbon. So we're not adding new carbon to the atmosphere, which is the challenge that everybody has faced. How do we stop pumping additional carbon into the atmosphere? And that's why sustainable aviation fuel is a credible option for us, because it's recycling CO2 or carbon that's already there rather than adding new carbon from fossil fuel.
Okay. Other questions? Take one of the
Hi, Joanna Puchinska from Reuters. Neste has said that they're going to have too much supply of SAF by 2028, and some investors say that uptake agreements are actually slowing down between airlines and SAF producers. What's behind that? Do you think that airlines are losing interest because of the investment environment? And this kind of, Neste seems to say something different than what you're saying. So what's actually happening?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really, you know, fathom why or how they can say something like that. So I can't really answer your question directly, because I can only see this great lack of SAF. Yeah, that's the only thing I can see, and that anybody can think that we will have too much SAF in 28. I really do not understand what kind of analysis they are basing that on. And, you know, maybe it could be sort of this local or global issue, right? So if the SAF market is, you know, geographically based, you as a potential energy producer, you will want to put your SAF plant in the largest aviation market, yeah? Because that's where people will be able to buy it and put it in their airplanes. And this is really problematic, you know, for the rest of us who don't fit those criteria. So what we need is to give potential SAF producers in countries with small aviation markets access to a global SAF market. Yeah. So if you're in Africa, if your airline is small, not very interesting investment proposition to build a plant there, but then you think, oh, but if I can sell to the world as a whole, it obviously changes my future demand picture. So that's the only thing I can imagine. If they're just thinking Singapore, yeah, for sure. At some point, if they have lots of production in Singapore, it will exceed probably at some point the demand of Singapore Airlines. But then if we have, you know, if we manage to give access to that supply also to airlines who are not so fortunate, then that excess supply will be quickly absorbed.
Yeah, I think this is nonsense from Neste, complete nonsense. And all you have to do is look at the agreements that airlines continue to sign today. So there's no lack of appetite. Every day you'll hear a new commitment by an airline to purchase sustainable aviation fuel. Neste is a commercial entity, you know, so maybe they're just trying to focus on some challenges that they have. But I can assure you, every drop of sustainable fuel that's produced has been used and will be used. So you know, Neste should continue to produce, and there's no doubt that there will continue to be huge demand, not just in 2028 and beyond. So I don't see any issue whatsoever here. You know, we have airlines in Europe entering into contracts to buy sustainable aviation fuel in the US because they can't get it in Europe. So to fulfill the commitments that they have made, they're going out around the world trying to purchase sustainable aviation fuel. So, Neste, quite honestly, is just talking nonsense.
That's plain talking. I love it. And, let's just, what was I going to say now? Sudden brain freeze. I had a cool thing to share, but maybe it'll come back.
All right, we'll take 2 more questions and then we'll move on to the outlook, and then we've got a long session after that for questions. So maybe one here and one in the front.
Good morning, Marie. This is Andreas from FEW Hamburg. As far as the alliance between airlines and big corporates is concerned, that the airlines convince the big companies, like Siemens, whatever, to purchase SAF for their business travelers. I remember there were some efforts in the past. How is this process going on? So what is your observation in that?
Yeah, we would obviously love everybody to be part of aviation's transition and help finance it, for sure. But this is a little bit problematic, We basically, again, we're living in a highly supply constrained environment where there just isn't enough SAF. So what we do not want is bigger companies with more money than what we have to step in and buy lots of SAF and sort of squeeze us out of the market or increase the already hefty price of SAF that we pay today. So actually this the SAF registry and accounting system that I showed earlier, it would be a system where we can accommodate all of that in one handy package. So we definitely want to invite them in, but we can, thanks to such a system, use the same batch of SAF for airlines claiming that against their what's called Scope 1 obligations, and then airlines can invite their customers to claim against the customer's Scope 3 voluntary or maybe obligatory decarbonization. And I just wanted to mention the cost. That's what I was momentarily thinking of a few moments ago. Yeah. So obviously, I think we're clearly a hard to abate, as it's called, industry. Not super easy, not tons of solutions today for how to decarbonize aviation. And other hard to abate industries are obviously cement and steel and so on, right? Lime, whatever, lots of them. And of all the industries, actually, I'm not aware of any industry that has committed as much money as our industry has committed to this process. And we paid probably 500 million more on the fuel bill last year because of SAF. Maybe it's about 750 million more this year, and obviously it will continue to rise. So here too, we understand, that there's a very, very keen self-interest here for the airlines. Yeah, anybody who doubts our commitments, I just don't get it, right? What we need is maximum SAF production so that this can achieve some kind of scale, so that the price can fall, so that we don't necessarily have to continue to pay this premium over jet fuel forever. That's clearly the mission here. And under CORSIA, the very inspired program that ICAO agreed upon back in 2016. Yeah, do you realize how early that was in these types of discussions? And under CORSIA, we estimate that between 24 and 35, the industry might pay somewhere between 20 and 30 billion towards its obligations under CORSIA. So, I'm bragging again, but show me somebody else, show me another industry, and then I will eat somebody's hat.
Great. We'll take one last question in the front, and then we'll move on.
2.4 billion next year, is the estimated extra cost next year for our SAF consumption.
Sally Gethin of Gethin's In-Flight News. Of course, the other side, almost hidden side of the sustainability journey for airlines is aircraft contrails, which is now emerging as an actor or a catalyst in global warming, not necessarily carbon emissions. And there's a lot of interesting early work going on, a lot of it pioneered by academics and universities, for example, in Europe, on the effect of contrails and the work to actually measure them to be able to create solutions to that. So does IATA see a role for itself in this whole new science, if you like, about contrails? And if so, what does that look like? Thank you.
Yes, we clearly need to understand all the science that pertains to our industry and our industry's both financial and environmental sustainability. Yeah, so we're keenly invested in anything that affects our financial and environmental sustainability. So we obviously have people in our team who devote lots of time to studying these things. We form all kinds of collaborations with various universities and other experts in all the fields that are relevant to our quest, and that includes obviously the non-CO2 emissions issue. And even the father of non-CO2 emissions analysis have said that it would be insane to deviate a single plane today because of assumptions regarding this, because the science is so immature. And when we look at the various measurements that are made today and their likelihood of being correct, in the aggregate they have about a 30% likelihood of being correct. So we cannot make policy today on something that we only have a 30% chance of being right about. Yeah, and therefore obviously a 70% chance of being wrong. So we are certainly keen on this science maturing. We are certainly keen on good policies emerging in due course, but we are absolutely not at all keen on hasty policies cobbled together based on insufficient information. So we are completely invested in trying to make the information available. And today there are perhaps 8 aircraft in the universe that can actually measure to some degree humidity in the zone where aircraft are flying. So, and this humidity measurement is one of the key measurements that we need to be able to understand this. So that gives you perhaps a measure of how far we are away from being able to do this in a science-based and data-driven way, which is obviously what we always pro.
Yeah, Murray has covered this. This isn't new. We've been talking about this in the industry for 25, 30 years. We know that contrails form in areas of high supersaturation, so it's not everywhere. We know that contrails can have a cooling effect, depending on what time they've created, or a warming effect. So as Murray said, the science is still quite immature. It's developing and developing quickly, but to take decisions today based on an immature assessment of the science would be a mistake, because anything that would deal with avoiding contrails is likely to lead to an increase in CO2 production. So we know CO2, the science around CO2 is absolutely clear. We've yet to see firm evidence and research that would support us doing it, but we are doing a lot of work in the area of non-CO2. So the industry is not silent or deaf to this. As I said, we've been looking at this for at least 25, if not 30 years.
Okay, thank you very much. We do want to get to the outlook, so I know there are some additional questions. We have a couple of other sessions later on today on SAF and on noise, so there'll be opportunities. Marie's also around for the rest of the day, so there'll be opportunities to ask questions also after we do the outlook presentation, but I would like to call on Andrew to take us through that. So Andrew, if you're ready.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you all again today. Look, I know there's always a lot of interest in IATA's financial forecast update, so I thought we'd skip straight to that. This first slide today gives you a very quick overview of some of the key factors. I know the team are distributing some more information to you as I speak, but a very quick snapshot up front. We think this year industry-wide net profit is going to be around $23.3 billion. That represents a net profit margin of around 2.6% and equates to around $5.44 per passenger. Looking ahead to 2024, to next year, we think that the level of profitability is going to be a little bit higher. We think we're going to get to around $25.7 billion. But when you look at the net profit margin and the profit per passenger, they're broadly unchanged between 2023 and 2024. So, with that in mind, how did we come to deliver these figures? And when we think about the industry performance and the industry outlook, I think a great place to start is to think about the bigger picture. We take a step back, we think about what's happening in the global macroeconomy, because we know that what happens in the business cycle has implications for the air transport market, both in terms of the passenger segment as well as the cargo segment. So, this slide is showing the IMF's latest forecasts. The blue bars here are global GDP. You can see that the IMF expects global GDP is going to be around 3% this year and is going to be similar level next year. To put that into context for you, 3% is pretty much consistent with the long-term average global growth rate. So not too hot, not too cold, somewhere kind of in the middle. Where this story gets interesting is when we start to look at the composition of that growth. And if we look at the two lines on this chart, the green line is showing the growth rate for the emerging economies. The red line is showing the growth rate for the so-called advanced economies in the world. You can see there's quite a different performance happening here. Those emerging markets are growing well above the global average growth rate, around 4% this year. You contrast that with what's happening in the so-called advanced economies growth rate, where they're running at around 1.5%. So there's quite a growth differential that's happening there. It nets out about 3%, but with a different performance. Thinking about 2024, again, not too much is different, regardless of which of that breakdown we actually look at. So if we dig down a little bit further and start to look at some of the regional levels, again we see some differences in performance from region to region, but it's consistent with the slide that we've just shown. So if you look, for example, at the top right-hand corner, we've got emerging and developing Asian growth rates. Down the bottom in the pink, we've got sub-Saharan Africa. Both of those regions, the emerging regions, are showing pretty robust rates of growth for next year. You compare them, for example, with what's happening in the US and in the Euro area, and you can see a considerable difference at play here. So this is important for understanding the demand, the growth outlook that we have underpinning our financial forecasts for the year ahead. One of the really interesting developments over recent years, and this has been important for the recovery of the air transport industry, and it also is an important factor going forward as well in our forecasts, is what's been happening with global labour markets. Labour markets have been pretty robust, and here at this chart we're showing unemployment rates across a range of different countries. Now we've taken these countries from different regions because this is really a global phenomenon that we've seen. Labour markets have been strong. Unemployment rates in many countries have been at record low levels, or if not at record low levels, very close to. Now of course there are some exceptions, but broadly speaking, these low unemployment rates have been an important factor driving the recovery and indeed the outlook. Why is that? Because low unemployment rates means that a lot of people have jobs. And if people have jobs, they have a steady income. And that means they're likely to jump onto their computers and buy stuff using e-commerce, which is good for air cargo demand. It also means that at the end of the week, they're likely to have some money left over, which they can then use for more discretionary spending items, such as air travel. So low unemployment rates have supported air transport demand. That's been a really positive story. But there's a flip side to that story. And the flip side is that low unemployment rates means that it's difficult for companies, not just in our sector, companies more broadly, to find labour and to cover for skill shortages. And Willie spoke a little bit about some of the developments in our industry over that regard. Those labour and skill shortages are still an issue. They're certainly less of an issue now. I think we're working through those, but we still see some examples of where labour and skill shortages come through, reflecting the strength of the labour market performance. In some markets, that's also converting into wage pressures, labour cost pressures that are coming through. And that's an important consideration, given the share of labour costs as part of total operating costs for your average airline. Of course, the other important cost factor is what's happening with oil prices. You can see the sharp spike that we saw in both oil and jet fuel prices last year when conflict broke out between Russia and Ukraine. The good news is that oil and jet fuel prices are lower this year than they were last year. They averaged around $135 a barrel last year. They're down more, around $115 for this year. Going forward, our working assumption is that it's going to be a couple of dollars a barrel lower next year, but broadly similar to where we are this year. So the good news is we're not as high as where we were last year. The not so good news is that we're still at a relatively high level. We're still well above $100 a barrel for the price of jet fuel for this year and for next year. On this chart, you can see the red bars, which are the jet fuel crack spread. That's just the difference between the oil price and the jet fuel price. The interesting thing here, you'll see in 2022, that crack spread widened, right? Those red bars got bigger. We saw that gap narrow earlier in the year, but it's widened again in recent months. So that's something that, given the share of oil prices, and we think it's going to, fuel costs, sorry, not oil prices, given the share of fuel costs in airline operating costs, and we think that's going to be around 30% this year, so it's a bit higher than usual. So we're certainly keeping a close eye on developments in the oil and jet fuel market. This is a chart that I know you've all seen before. It's a chart that we put together to track the recovery of the industry compared with the pre-COVID level. The good news is that this is probably going to be the last time that you see this chart, because it's all about recovery, and you can see we're just about there. Right? If you look at the green line, which is industry CTKs, cargo volumes, and the dashed black line, which is passenger volumes at the industry level, you can see we're within 2 to 2.5% of getting back to those pre-COVID levels. There are some differences if you split out the passenger volumes for domestic and international. Domestic RPKs have actually exceeded their pre-COVID level since April of this year. Right? So on the domestic side, we're moving forward. At the industry level, I think we can pretty much stop talking about the recovery. The recovery is kind of over. We're now looking ahead. We're looking forward. If we take away the reference back to 2019 and we just look at what's happening on traffic volumes, this chart shows both CTKs and RPKs. The RPKs are shown there in the blue line, and CTKs are in the red. I think the first thing that jumps out at people on this chart is the very strong increase that we've seen in RPKs. RPK growth currently is around 30% in year-on-year terms. So that's a very strong, that's continued the momentum that we've seen. The profile for CTKs is very different, as you can see. We had around 18 months of year-on-year declines in cargo volumes through to recent months. But we think that there's a flaw in cargo volumes. Cargo volumes have stopped easing, have stopped falling. We built that flaw, and we've now seen growth of 4.5% in cargo volumes over the past year. This provides a good foundation, and in fact it provides some momentum for our forecasts into 2024. And you can see there, we think that RPKs are going to increase by a little bit below 10% next year, and cargo volumes by around 4.5% in 2024. We've got a session on cargo later this afternoon, so I'm going to focus a little bit here on the pack side rather than cargo. One of the other really important developments that we've seen in this recovery period is that the recovery is not just about traffic volumes. We've also seen a recovery in passenger load factors. So if you look at what's happened down the bottom in the red area, you can see that for Q3 this year, the passenger load factor is pretty much the same as it was pre-COVID. If you look at the regional splits, the blue bars here, you can see that there are 3 regions where the passenger load factor is actually higher than where we were pre-COVID. So you can see the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa have all moved ahead of those passenger load factor levels historically. I think this makes sense to a lot of people. Anybody that's flown recently knows that aircraft are pretty much full. So this has been an important part which helps to underpin the financial recovery for airlines as well. So let's go back to that financial recovery. So these are the same numbers that we saw at the outset, the $23.3 billion net profit this year, rising to 25.7 next year. A couple of key things to take away from this chart. First one is obviously the speed and the magnitude of the recovery that we've seen in the industry. This chart really makes it very clear. From a loss of almost $140 billion just 3 years ago, the industry is back in a profit position this year. That's a remarkable performance. I know you've all heard IATA talk about the resilience of the air transport industry on various occasions previously. I think this is a fantastic example of exactly that. However, we shouldn't get too carried away, right? Because as we spoke at the outset, this corresponds to a net profit margin of around 2.6, 2.7%, and it equates to a passenger profit of less than $4.50. Sorry, $5.50, I'm sorry. What this really highlights is that our industry remains a high volume, low margin business. Outcomes like this at forecast for profitability really aren't putting the industry on a sustainable financial footing. That's still very much a work in progress. This is a great result, don't get me wrong, right? But it doesn't mean that we can relax that the job is done. There's still work in progress to ensure that the industry going forward is financially sustainable. When we take a quick look at the regional financial performance, the good news is that we're seeing an improvement across all regions. It's happening at a different pace. Some regions have recovered faster than others, and you can see that depicted here. Here we're showing the EBIT margin. For all regions, that EBIT margin gets back to positive territory no later than next year. So the pace might be different, the speed at which the recovery is happening is different, but it's happening across all regions. This chart is just showing the recovery in passenger volumes, and you can see that all regions apart from Asia Pacific recover their 2019 level of passenger volumes this year in our current forecasts. Asia Pac gets there next year. These are the annual volume measures. And just given the size of Asia Pac, it means that the world figure may also not get there until next year. You can see, I'll let you take these forecasts away, but you can see at the global level, we think we're going to get to about 99% of the pre-COVID level for the global figure this year. So we may flip over, we may get there yet. We think for 2024, we're going to have an historically high level of passenger journeys. We think there's going to be something like 4.7 billion passenger journeys next year, up from 4.5 billion in 2019. The last slide that I have today is around risks. I'm not going to talk too much to this slide. Happy to talk about that in the Q&A. The key takeaway here is that there are both upside risks to our forecasts and downside risks. We often focus on the downside, but we shouldn't forget about the upside risks. On balance, however, I think it's fair to say that the balance of risks around our forecast currently is still tilted a little bit to the downside. Tony, I'll leave it there. Hand back to you.
Great, thank you very much. So just a reminder, the embargo is still on. I have 10:17, so we have about another 28 minutes before the embargo is out. That gives us 28 minutes for questions. So who wants to ask the first question? Here.
This microphone or just
Yeah, just press on the...
yeah, here it goes. Jose Suarez from Air Mexico. Question. You spoke for the Director General, Mr. Walsh. You spoke a little about Amsterdam's situation and about the reduction of operations. But in Mexico, we're facing a similar problem. In January, we'll be facing an important reduction for Mexico City Airport. So I'd like to know your opinion on the government's making this kind of decrees that affect directly airports in order, in the case of Mexico City, to benefit the new airport.
Yeah, my comments are the same, regardless of where they happen. I think governments need to think very carefully about the impact on their economy when they play around with capacity at airports. Mexico has been an interesting one because of the previous commitment to develop a new airport, and then that was cancelled, and then a move to try and redistribute traffic. So what we're seeing in Mexico is not similar to what we've witnessed in other parts of the world. But whenever this happens, it has a clear and sometimes very significant impact on regional economic activity, because it disrupts the network of aircraft that operate into the airports. And it also, I think, makes airlines think about their commitment to the market when you get these short-term changes to the way the airport operates. Today, we have a situation where airlines have fewer aircraft than they would like to have because of the delays in the delivery of new aircraft and the problems with supply chain. So it's not like normal years where I think airlines are looking for new growth opportunities. Now they have fewer aircraft than they would have traditionally liked. So moving those aircraft to more attractive markets, more stable markets, is something that we're witnessing. So I think in the current climate, it could have a disproportionate impact on the way Mexico airport operates.
Okay, question for Karen.
Karen Walker at Transport World. Andrew, can I just, you ended your presentation on with the risk, the balance of risk. Can you just put that in context in terms of sort of the world events, Middle East, et cetera, just how much of that you see as a risk to the industry?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think one of the key challenges at the moment is certainly on the geopolitical side. It's one of the things that we are keeping a very close eye on. That, of course, is very difficult to try to quantify and to directly build into our forecasts and our models. But I think it's fair to say that in recent years, the level of geopolitical tensions globally has increased. It's not just the Middle East, it's not just Russia, Ukraine. I think there are sort of simmering tensions elsewhere. The world has become a bit more of an unfriendly place, and that creates plenty of challenges for global industries such as aviation. But so those geopolitical risks, they're by no means the only risks that we're looking at, but they're certainly a key part of it. And we're also looking at some of the macroeconomic risks. As Willie mentioned earlier, regulation around the world is another important source of risk. But again, I'd just mentioned that some of those could work in both ways. Some of those we could see things playing out more favourably in terms of our forecast and supporting a stronger industry growth outcome, as well as perhaps working in the opposite direction on the downside as well.
Just on the Middle East, it's probably worth commenting that in the October figures we didn't see any impact at an aggregate level. In fact, carriers in the Middle East are 6.6% ahead of where they were in 2019, and we continue to see strong growth in October 23 versus October 22. So while it may, and indeed is impacting on some individual airlines, when we look at the region, we're not seeing any noticeable impact on traffic growth.
Okay, we'll take a question from Johnny. Yes.
Hi, good morning. Gianni Dragoni, Sole 24 Italy. About pricing, I'm referring to critics spread, especially during the summer, about the raise of prices of flights. Don't you think that airlines are making super profits?
Well, I think you've seen from the presentation, airlines are not making super profits. You know, net margins of around 2.5%, $5.44 per passenger. You know, that's not a super profit. In fact, we were just looking. We commented in the release there. You probably had an opportunity to read it. You know, I'd just about buy you a grande latte in a London Starbucks. So given that we were quoting Starbucks, I was curious as to what the net margin for Starbucks. It just finished its year end in October. Starbucks net margin is 11.5%. You know, we're 2.5%. So you know, I think it's wrong when people talk about super profits. Yes, there are some airlines doing well, but in the main, you know, this industry is not recovering its cost of capital. It's still struggling at a global level, and while individual airlines may be performing well, it's wrong and untrue to say that airlines are making super profits. They're not. The other point is when we've done a lot of work on this in relation to fares and how fares have developed, and in all of the markets that we've looked at, airfares have either risen in line with general inflation, or in fact have lagged slightly behind general inflation. And we have access to hundreds of millions of tickets that are sold, and we've analysed all of those tickets, looking month on month, you know, going back to 2019 to see how it's developed. And in all of the markets we've analysed, airfares are close to, but indeed I think in most they're slightly below inflation.
I also think that there's some confusion maybe in the conversations about these things that relates to the base year. Yeah, sorry to make such a pedantic comment perhaps, but obviously if you're looking at ticket evolutions from 2020 or 21 or even 22, they're going to look very important. Yeah. But when you look at these ticket price evolutions from 2019 or 2015, which is indeed what Willie is referring to, then we get this picture that ticket prices have just barely, maybe, followed the path of inflation. And remember again that airlines inflation, if I can put it that way, is way above the consumer price inflation. Because, you know, in consumer price inflation, in the consumption basket, energy weighs a high number is perhaps around 6%, fact check by all means, in the US. And they basically pay the Brent oil price, if you see what I'm saying. Whereas we obviously have a 30% weight of energy in our consumption basket, and we pay a premium of, you know, some $30 per barrel on top of the Brent price. So if we think that ticket prices have barely held up with consumer price inflation, you can now imagine how much below our own inflation rate these ticket price evolutions currently are.
Yeah, and I guess just one other note would be to caution people to look at what data you're seeing, whether it's fares in the market versus fares that are purchased, which is the basis for the data that we're looking at. So maybe we'll take one here. You've been very patient.
Yes.
Ashraf Al-Hadidi, Al-Ahram newspaper, Egypt. Mr. Willie, according to the numbers of recovery, and in your opinion, what is the main factors which help the industry to come back and recovery to pre-pandemic?
I think that there are a number of factors. First of all, I think it's very clear that there's a pent-up demand. People want to travel. We know, we've spoken about it even this morning, we spoke about the value of aviation. Our industry is not just about moving people and boxes from one place to another. There are much broader values that our industry brings in terms of supporting trade and business, the transfer of capital. We support the opportunities for education, for example, and tourism. So there are all of these additional benefits. I think that's an important part that often is unrecognised when people think about our industry. So yeah, we have seen a strong recovery in Europe. We know that airlines have re-established their networks. Connectivity is not quite back to where it was, but the networks have grown quickly. There's certainly that desire for people to travel. We spoke about the positive labour market developments in many countries as well, right? So not only do people want to fly, they've also got the means to fly. That's also supported the demand, the income that people have. We looked at some of the regional differences globally as well, so there are different stories across different regions, but certainly the performance in this part of the world, in Europe, notwithstanding the challenges, for example, of Russia, Ukraine, and some of the economic slowdown even that we've seen in some of the key Western European economies this year in particular. The demand for travel is undiminished. It's been very strong through Europe, as it has in other regions, as they've opened up their markets following the pandemic.
Big question here.
Thank you, Jared Coburn from the West Australian. Look, I just wanted to probably ask a bit more of an Asia-Pacific regional question. The Australian government is obviously looking at a review of the slot management system and also a compensation scheme. So I just wanted to ask what risk that would play to seat capacity in the region and airlines returning to pre-pandemic levels.
So Asia Pacific, I think we're forecasting a small loss in current year 2023 and a small profit in 2024. I think around 100 million in both years, 100 million loss in 23 and I think around 100 million net profit in 2024. Not so much Australia, but the general Asia Pacific region. I think what we've witnessed in Asia Pacific, so in October, international travel in Asia Pacific was at 80% of where it was in 2019. Domestic markets are actually above where they were in 2019, but the lag in recovery has been the international market. So overall traffic in Asia Pacific, because there's a big domestic market there, is at 90% of where it was in 2019. But that's principally, as I said, a combination of domestic markets being above 2019 and international markets still about 20% below where they were in 2019. And that's really the reason why Asia Pacific is lagging, that the international market has not caught up to the levels that we're seeing in other parts of the world.
Just very quickly, Tony, if I could add to that. The last slide that I have, you can see the recovery in passenger volumes in Asia Pac is slower than other regions, but it certainly catches up. And in fact, I think that the last year that we show in that chart, Asia Pac actually moves ahead. Right? So it's really a timing issue that we're expecting strong growth in Asia Pac, stronger growth in that region next year than we're seeing elsewhere.
Hi, good morning. Laura Westbrook with the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. Question to Willie on Hong Kong. Do you see Hong Kong ever recovering to pre-pandemic levels? And with business travel, do you see that returning sort of earlier or later than expected? And if I could just tack on a China question, With the continuing closure of the Russian airspace, do you think that European governments could single out Chinese carriers, given that frequency is quite uneven and Chinese, Middle East and Indian carriers are able to fly over Russia?
Yeah, so on Russia, I don't see that happening. Certainly there's, I think it was considered briefly, but I don't believe there's any legal basis for them to do that, and we wouldn't encourage that. You know, our view is we want to see peace return to the region, and we want to see Russian space open to everybody. So I think, you know, while it's disappointing and frustrating for some carriers that have to take a longer routing to serve the market, I think that's going to be the feature of the market for some time to come. On Hong Kong, I think, to be fair, Hong Kong is recovering stronger than we had expected. I think it's the whole emphasis on not just Hong Kong, but the Greater Bay Area and the initiatives they have there to attract traffic into the region and into Hong Kong. And they're making, I think, considerable progress from that point of view. On business travel, I always caution people on this issue because people often look at business travel and consider it to be premium travel, and they're two very different segments. So premium travel consists of people traveling on business, but people traveling on leisure as well. And what we've seen is this premium travel has actually recovered slightly faster than economy travel. Broadly the same now, but the recovery, the early recovery was stronger there. And I think that goes to all the points that Andrew was talking about earlier. You know, people have disposable income, people are secure in their employment, people have wanted to travel, and people have been prepared to spend a premium for a premium service. So business travel somewhat different because business travelers travel in the premium and in the economy cabins. And I think there is evidence that you know, in most markets, the level of activity for business is still below where it was in 2019. But premium travel is actually back to where you know, it has recovered slightly faster than the economy and you know, showing strong performance there.
Okay, we're into the last sort of 10-15 minutes of the Q&A session. So if I can ask people to keep their questions short, we'll try and keep the answers sharp and get through as many as we possibly can. Kurt.
Hi, Kurt Hoff from Air Transport World. Just 2 points. How fast do you think when one day, hopefully, the airspace over Russia is open again, how fast the industry can reply on that, work on that? And what makes the opening of China for the airline industry? How much more demand you will see from this part of the world?
Yeah. So I don't see Russian airspace opening in the foreseeable future, and you've probably heard some of the carriers in the region have made plans now for the long-term closure of Russian airspace. I think the important point to make is that you know, had this happened 10 years ago, it would have had a very significant impact because most of the aircraft flying back then would not have had the range and payload capability to serve the market without a technical stop. That's not the case today. So the market is being served. Most of the aircraft operating that have range and payload capability to serve it without doing technical stop. So it's having an impact, but you know, as I said, it's not as significant an impact as it might have been a few years back. And I think you know, some of the issues in relation to China is the US-China market, which obviously was a big market, and recovery in that market has been particularly slow for a combination of reasons. You know, not least is the fact that a lot of the airlines who would serve that international market have delays to the delivery of new wide-body aircraft. So, you know, as Andrew said, we see this recovery in the Asia-Pacific region accelerating as we go into 2024 with a strong growth in that market. So all the signs are pointing to continuing strong recovery in Asia-Pacific.
Okay, take a question over there.
Yeah, Ian Taylor, Travel Weekly in London. Willie, you said that there was no impact of the Gaza-Israel war on the October figures, but Forward Keys, which aggregates the GDS forward bookings, reported at the end of November that they'd seen an impact both regionally and globally. So I wonder if that's something you've taken account of in your forecast for into next year. And just secondly, if I can ask you, Willie, on slots and the UK proposals for slot reform, you were justifiably dismissive of the government, but I saw the aviation director at the Department for Transport speak at an aviation conference a couple of weeks ago and was really bullish about pushing this through. So is it something they could effect quite quickly, or is it something that you see foundering?
So all I can do is tell you the figures that we're looking at, and obviously GDS figures only represent a small proportion of the overall industry. We have a lot more data available to us and a lot more hard data, and based on that, the figures I quoted for you. And if I look at the traffic flows in that region, Middle East to Africa, Middle East to Asia, Middle East to Europe, Middle East to North America, actually we see very strong growth in things like Middle East to North America, very strong. And the others have grown as well. But based on the figures that we have on an aggregate basis, that's the situation we have. Obviously, we'll continue to keep that under review. And on slots, they've been talking about slot reform in the UK for, 20 years. So we'll wait and see. But I think there's a lot of bigger challenges in the UK market for the review of slot regulations. And I think, to be fair, the Department of Transport there are smart, and they typically have a good understanding of what it would mean on a global basis if they try to unwind the slot rules that apply. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But personally, I wouldn't be too exercised by it.
Go over there.
Yeah, hi, Willie. This is Arindam from the Economic Times in India. So, Andrew's presentation showed the growth coming sharply from emerging markets like probably India and all, which has been breaking the global standards in terms of growth. But those economies are also turning more and more protectionist in terms of bilateral rights or airport laws. So how does that come in the context of expansion of airlines into India and China in those places?
Well, I think India and China are somewhat different to the rest of the world in that they continue to invest in airports and infrastructure. So, I was looking back in 2000 from memory. The Chinese domestic market represented 2.8% of all commercial flying. In 2019, it was 9.8%. And actually, 2023 is back around 10-11%. The Indian domestic market was less than 1% in 2000, and it's at 1.7% today. The potential for growth in India, when you look at the demographics, when you look at the geography of the country, when you look at the investments that are being made, I think India is going to be a hugely exciting market, probably much more so than anywhere else. So personally, I would be very optimistic about growth in India, given what we're seeing in terms of investment in infrastructure and the potential for additional flights and people flying in India. So I think India is the market for the future.
Okay, take a question here.
Good morning, Charlotte O'Brien from Bloomberg. Just to ask more a general question, I wondered if you could talk a bit more about how you see demand evolving next year, and given all the headwinds on the horizon from economics to geopolitics, how much of a risk do you see to the 2024 forecast? Thanks.
Yeah, look, I think overall we are cautiously optimistic about the outlook for next year. In terms of volumes, we think RPKs are going to increase by about 9.8%, so that's passenger volumes. Cargo volumes about 4.5%. The thing you'll notice, even at 9.8%, that's a slower growth rate than we've seen in recent years, and we think growth will slow. We're kind of normalising that growth rate on the RPK side. But it's for 2024, it's another very strong performance, almost double digit. So we are optimistic. We certainly are very cognizant of the risks to the outlook and the downside risks to the outlook. So, you know, there are a number of those factors that we're definitely keeping an eye on that could disrupt a very favourable performance again next year for the industry. When you think about how that translates into financials, again, we come back to the relatively small margins, 2.7% net profit margin, and $5.40 per passenger net profit. So, you know, in some ways there's not a lot of wriggle room in there for airlines. That financial security is not there, and as I said, it's still a work in progress on the financial side. But I think, you know, and those downside risks could very well come into play there, depending exactly how that works out going forward. But overall, I think cautiously optimistic regarding the outlook for 2024, both in terms of traffic volumes and financial performance.
Thank you. Could I just ask really quickly?
I think we need, we're short on time, so let's limit to one question.
Sure, no problem.
Go here and we'll work towards the back.
Hey, Christian Favre from Valor Econômico. I was wondering if you can comment on the Latin America performance for 2023 and 2024. Is the region you're expecting a net loss in both years? Can you comment on the challenge, the specific challenge for the region? And then a second one regarding debits. All air companies in Brazil, they are trying to restructure their debits with special lessors after the pandemic. Do you see a challenge in terms of that, and maybe they might face some financial problems in the near future of a big bankruptcy? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to comment on particular airlines or particular situations, but I think when we think of the Latin America region, it's always a challenging region because there's a lot happening. There's a lot of diversity across the region. What we're seeing at the moment is some airlines in that part of the world are actually performing very strongly, but there are also a number of airlines that are really struggling. And that tends to be the case across that region, which makes it interesting for us to try to build a regional outlook. I think there are still some airlines there going through the Chapter 11 proceedings. We know the economic situation in some parts of Latin America, Argentina, I guess at the moment is the obvious one. It also creates a very challenging operating environment. So when you think about what's happening economically, when you think about what's happening in the industry with airlines, there are plenty of challenges there. Certainly in our forecasts, we're seeing an improvement in financial performance for the Latin America region. But you're right, in terms of net post-tax profit, we've still got a modest loss in that part of the world, both this year and next year. But we're buoyed by the fact that the financial situation is improving there.
One of the things that is specific to the region is they tend to face higher infrastructure and fuel costs than most of the parts of the world, which has always traditionally been a drag on profitability in the region. So taxation, fuel prices, infrastructure charges tend to be higher than average there.
Okay, thank you. So it is 10:45, which means the embargo is off. We'll take another couple of questions and then we'll call it a day. So one question here. Please keep them short.
Yeah. Richard Schuurman, RSI again. A question to Mary Owens about sustainability. You have made your point in Dubai. There is a CAF 3 agreement. There is a commitment to invest. We have CAP 28 in Dubai. How do these things come together in your view? And are we now really getting somewhere?
I mean, you know, this is the half full, half empty question, no? And obviously, given everything that we shared earlier, it's definitely more empty than full. Yeah. And I really don't know, you know, what else does the world need to realize that that this is urgent? The mind sort of boggles, no? And the only explanation I can find for the delay in, you know, making more accelerated progress on renewable energies and all of these, you know, climate-related solutions that we need to bring to market. The only thing that I can see that sort of makes sense, that stands in the way of that, is the profits that you can make in oil. Yeah, you know, as long, fundamentally, the investment proposition has to be attractive. If we cannot, you know, nobody's going, very few people, I don't know what you do with your money, yeah, but, you know, if you have a choice between putting 100 francs, whatever currency, in an investment that you know pretty much for sure is going to yield a positive return, and this other investment that you think might not, you know, it's sort of a no-brainer for most of us, right? And, you know, whatever moral arguments or doing the right thing and all of those things, you know, it only intervenes at the margin. I would argue that ESG investing, ESG ratings, all of these things, they only intervene at the margin when you have two equally attractive investment propositions to choose from. Then you will choose the one with the best ESG metrics. Otherwise, you will choose the most profitable one. Yeah. So this obviously has to change. Yeah, it's just much too easy to make money in oil and gas. And it has changed clearly, completely with the advent of the war in Ukraine. Before that, the world was trying to restrict oil exploration. Yeah, the US had said no more exploration on federal land. That's been lifted. Everybody lifted every restriction. And now it's like, go ahead and drill as much as you can. And that's really where we are. And the US is now the world's greatest oil producer and so on. So there's definitely some kind of, you know, I don't know, I don't mean to call our regulators schizophrenic, but, you know, there's definitely an incoherence in their spheres that I think exceeds any incoherence in our spheres, if I may be so blunt. And then there's also the time element of these considerations. Yeah, it's like, you know, over which time horizon are you optimizing? Yeah. Most people optimize over a very short time horizon, and 26 years seems still very, very long for most people. Yeah. Whereas, you know, in our activity, where we are really trying to get airlines to become net zero by 2050, 26 years is like, you know, we can totally feel that fire under the soles of our feet, and we're in a hurry. And I don't know really how to bridge that time horizon gap. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that'll have to be the last question. We've got our speakers with some other appointments coming on very soon. So thank you all very much. We have a coffee break out here. We'll have people around during the coffee breaks if you have other questions. And I believe we reconvene at 11:15 in about 25 minutes. So